Picture this. You're in front of your latest prospect, closing the biggest deal of your life. Your pitch decks were perfect. Your scripts, flawless. And when the time came to answer the golden question of, are you ready to move forward? Nothing happened. For everyone who loves sales, this is their worst nightmare. But fear not, because in this podcast, we're unraveling the enigma behind those missed opportunities. From appointments that evaporate to presentations that felt like a Broadway show but ended in awkward silence, we're dissecting it all. Welcome to Love Your Sales.
This podcast is presented by GenHead. GenHead leverages AI so small and medium-sized businesses can find their ideal clients to make more sales. Other companies talk about AI, but we are using it every day to drive down marketing costs and increase revenue. Learn more at genhead.com. That's genhead.com.
Welcome to another episode of Love Your Sales. I am so thrilled that today I am joined by Dustin Kavelaris. Dustin is a Wisconsin sales director for Office H2O, a leader in modern purified drinking water and commercial ice equipment for businesses. He is an established sales and people leader for nearly 20 years. He's led sales divisions in direct B2C, B2B, indirect channel management, and has navigated a plethora of sales leadership roles for small, privately held companies up through publicly traded Fortune 50 companies. He's completed sales coursework through the Northwestern Kellogg Executive Education and is committed to lifelong learning. I love that. Thank you so much, Dustin, for joining me today. I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I couldn't be more thrilled to talk about all the things that you cover here.
Yes, I'm a complete nerd. I am a lifelong learner as well. I love the opportunity that I get to have people come on and educate me. It's really, a roundabout way of getting people on the hot seat and being able to pick their brain, right? So, so tell me a little bit about your experience, your background in a high level of, kind of being that leader, that sales leader that, and what you do and kind of on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, I started, I think from 16 years old, have been in some sales centric capacity. And so through college, it's my first true kind of sales, kind of high activity sales gig. And I started in telecom. Ended up working my way up through from a standard sales consultant up through a regional sales manager. And the epiphany I had, I don't know, it was probably 2007. I had a really tough, I'm going to call him a boss to work for. And I distinguish boss and leader because I think there's such a interesting dynamic between those two phrases. I don't let my teams today call me boss because the behaviors between the two are just very different. But I just remember thinking to myself, man, I love the impact that leaders have. I had a tough boss to work for and just kind of vowed that, if I got into leadership, I wanted to be, the leader that I didn't have at that time. And so, I spent, a whole lot of years, 16 years in telecom, kind of working my way up through call it the corporate life, so to speak. Big corporate merger happened and exited that during COVID. Went back to kind of a medium-sized privately held company and then to an even smaller company. And so I've been through the whole gamut of, company sizes and dynamic of teams and different channels. And all along the way, just the experience in the different people you interact with, the different type of teams, the reoccurring theme never changes on what people look for in a leader, and particularly call it modern day leadership. It has evolved and is evolving quickly. And there's a lot of companies that are stuck in a position that don't think they've got a good pulse on this. So I'm excited to talk more about kind of what that means from my vantage point.
Very interesting. So, and I love when people have that multifaceted experience of working for the large private, the large companies that are the privately held, the publicly, I think that it gives that, and I've had that experience as well, where, you're working for a privately held, decent sized organization, and then you go into a monster size organization that's publicly traded, because there is a completely different, feel to it, or there can be a completely different feel to it. But I love those backgrounds when you're able to talk to somebody and they go, oh yeah, yeah. So I've been able to experience a variety of different environments, and you can pick out the things that you directly like immediately and see the trends of what doesn't work really quickly.
Absolutely. And the dynamics are very different, I mean, night and day. And so I think there are folks who, right, wrong, and different. They've either kind of stayed in one place or they've targeted similar sized companies. And in my opinion, when you go to publicly traded companies, particularly big ones and very tall organizations, and there's layers of red tape and there's, a ton of kind of, call it company politics for lack of a better term, to navigate those, the skill sets to work through that as a leader and have your team successful, it's very different than when, you can just walk right up to a president, at a small company and say, something's not working here. Can we fix this? So yeah, very different. And, but like I said earlier, the thing that never changes though is what people need to be successful. And yeah, it's the experiences. It's been very humbling, to be able to talk about those different experiences.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember just even, and I want to get back to that, what people need in order to be successful. But for a second, I just want to reminisce here for 2 seconds. I remember my days of, like, I want to go to this networking meeting and having to get approval for like a $25 fee. Like, it's like, why do I have to fight so hard to get, approval to go and do my job? Versus that small company where it's like they just hand you a credit card and go, yeah, here you go. Like, go out and meet people, have lunches, and spend money. And you're like, oh, okay, I can do that. And you're like, wait, but you're a small company. Like, do I have a budget? And they're like, just don't spend that much. Like, if it gets out to you and you're like, seriously? Yet you have a monster company, like a monster size, publicly $1 billion company that's like, you have to jump through hoops to spend $25 at a networking event. And you're like, what is going on? Like, why is it so hard to do my job? Sorry. Okay. Anyways, I
Yeah.
digress. So, right. I'm just thinking, and again, I had that same, like, because I worked at a very large publicly traded company. And while there were some perks that were amazing, like, because once you did get approval, you could get approvals for some larger budgeted items because they had, and the training, there were some perks of, like, they would send you for training and they had a budget of 5,000 where, they would actually send you out of state for some really great, amazing training programs. But it took 6 months to a year where they finally came back and they're like, yeah, we've got this much of a budget. It's like, okay, great. I asked for that a year ago, but it's great that it's finally been approved. Things just, anyway, okay. So let's talk about the thing that's consistent among, what salespeople need to be successful. That's kind of that consistency throughout any organization.
Yeah. Well, I think, regardless of your title and role, I know this tends to be a sales centric conversation, and, leadership is its own form of sales because you're kind of selling to everyone around you about the value proposition you bring to the table. But let's start with kind of how we got here to begin with, and some considerations of, if you're in a position right now where you're asking yourself, like, do I have an effective sales organization? Is my entire company, a well-tuned machine? The sales organization portion of that, I think, I'm probably biased here, of course, being in sales and leadership, but the revenue engine for a company, every every department is important, not discrediting that, but the revenue engine, if that nozzle or faucet gets turned off, it causes a really difficult domino effect that's tough to navigate. And that downward spiral that happens when sales and revenue is down, it impacts everyone. And so keeping this portion of the company in a healthy place, yeah, I'd argue it's pretty important.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you're looking at your sales organization leadership, obviously, look, do you feel that you have modern leadership, and like, what's the litmus test on, what that means? And so you start with just, what's the growth trajectory and what's the attrition look like? Do you keep people? And, the old saying of, people don't leave companies, they leave poor leaders. There's definitely some truth to that.
Right.
So the question is like, what do people need? Like, if you're new in sales, you're a tenured person in sales, like, what do you need from leadership today? And the things that I think people don't get right in leadership is people who understand what the current either new or older generation need, and being a chameleon for different people. And so some of the consistent things that I see that companies really need to take a hard look at is, do you have a leader who is a lifelong learner? And I say that because lifelong learning to me, or a lack thereof, is either a overconfidence that you got it all together, or a just poor self-awareness that you set the tone of making small increments of bettering yourself and your people around you every single day. So, when I've gone into organizations and I've looked at, what's the environment like here? One of the first things I look for is, the people around here, are they pursuing growth mindsets and just getting better at things? Do you, to your earlier point about, expenses being approved, one point in time, I had asked a district manager of mine, I'm like, I've got this guy who wants to improve. He wants to move up the chain. He wants to become a better leader. There's a couple of books I'd like him to read. And it's like, this is an investment, right? In his professional development, and getting a $20 book approved was like a huge hassle. Yet companies spend an enormous amount of payroll pulling people into meaningless meetings. You quantify the value of a meeting, but you pull a bunch of leaders into one, and you got an absurd amount of payroll to talk about the business rather than doing the business. So yeah, I mean, kind of the first thing for me is just, what's the vibe on just general, are people working hard to get better at leadership or skill sets? And so if you don't have a dedicated budget, I was at a company called Penta Technologies, and it was a small construction software company. And I'll tell you, kind of going the extreme end of this, my performance reviews there, part of my annual bonus was predicated on the plan I put together on how I was going to just get better at being a leader. It was, what was I going to do to evolve? And so I had to, build a plan and say, look, here are the things I want to do to get better as a leader contributor. It wasn't about sales results. It was about professional development and growth. And that was like, we're not going to pay you if you're not working hard to get better. And I'd love to be in a fly on the wall, walk into some boardrooms or some, senior leadership and say, look, can we carve out a budget or put a bonus tied to people just growing their, capabilities as a contributor? And I mean, you'd probably see a lot of eye rolls. Like, we don't have a budget for that. It's like, whew.
Right.
All right. So that's probably a long-winded answer of, are people getting better?
It's the same concept of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, wait a second. Or the whole, well, we've been doing it this way forever and it works. Well, great, but everything around you is changing. You want to stay stagnant, but go peek outside, because the world is not staying stagnant. And you're going to be archaic, and everything around you is going to be all shiny and new. And eventually people are just going to walk past you because you're not shifting and moving and growing with the times. You're going to be selling, the way that people did 10 years ago, which is no longer going to be kosher with the way that people are buying. If that's how you want to do it, fine. But you're going to be obsolete. That's what it comes down to. If you want your team to never grow, expand, learn, I mean, just think from 5 years ago, the way that we as individuals now meet each other. Like I half the time I'm having a sales call, the first time I meet somebody is exactly how we're talking right now.
Sure. Yeah.
That was not how I started. 5 years ago, my first meeting was, okay, what's your address? Where am I coming? Is there any special instructions on parking? Because I was meeting a lot of manufacturing companies at that time, a ton of them. And you did not meet, and even today, if I'm talking to a manufacturing company, I still ask, do you want me to come in? Because there's still some manufacturing companies that are not up on, a ton of Zoom. Majority of them have now shifted and they're like, no, we can just meet via Zoom. And I was like, oh, okay, wow. Like the entire world is now, is now Zoom or Teams or Google or pick your platform. Like it's shifted. And here's about the technology. I'm talking about these complete body language. I can no longer, this has been a learning curve. As a salesperson, I was taught when you walk in a room with somebody, read how they choose their chair, see how they sit, watch their body language. These are all different types of buying signs throughout a sales meeting. Well, you no longer have that luxury. You've got to learn a completely different way of understanding buying signs now. So that's been a learning curve. Now I'm listening to, now I'm listening to fluctuations in their voice, the tone, the pauses. I mean, these are all things that as a salesperson, that if I'm meeting somebody via Zoom for the first time, it's completely different. I've had to learn a new skill set on, are they putting their eyes up because they're interested? Like, and a lot of people who are non-salespeople don't understand that, like, these are all things that throughout my career I've become hypersensitive to, like, and I'm sure Dustin, you too. Like if somebody, I remember back in the early days, if somebody would cross their arms and lean completely back in their chair, it was like, oh crap, I really got to get this person back engaged. Because these, again, these are things that it's like, are they leaning in? Are they but now it's a whole new world. It's a whole new world. Now, again, if I get somebody in person to have that first discovery, it's like, oh God, okay, now I'm back in my comfort zone. Like this is the way that I grew up in sales.
Yeah, you brought up some amazing points because, just when you apply, kind of all the technology, the different ways people purchase now, that the general capability of a salesperson it's more robust. Sales is a performance metric. While you can kind of teach things, there are some intangibles that top salespeople do that I don't think you can teach. And navigating that today, one of the other kind of elements that I think is both true for salespeople, but particularly in sales leadership too, is how do you bring authenticity to the mix? And so we did this thing where everything was in person back in the day. What that might mean to different people. But I remember talking to my parents who was in sales, and everything was they'd be on the road, and like you didn't do stuff like this, and so everything was a lot of human interaction. And now there's a lot of different ways that opened up doors to be able to sell at a broader scale, but less direct human interaction. Some people aren't good with Zoom, and so how do you bring authenticity? I think one of the other things that are prominent today that not enough people talk about is, if you want to lead a sales organization, and or really kind of, I guess, any organization for that matter, is authenticity and leadership to me is the same as prospects are really good at knowing if you're kind of full of crap, if there's that fake rapport, and they can see right through it. They see the motive behind what you're trying to accomplish. And so there's a level of authenticity from prospect to salesperson as there is sales leader to salesperson or team, or insert leader, right, and kind of direct report. And so how do you ask people, how do you navigate that? How do you teach authenticity? And, some things that people can do today to, again, the litmus test is, if I was a VP of sales and I wanted to see if my director of sales was an effective leader, one of the first things I would do is you know, I'd go out and survey my field team and say, where's your confidence level, and do either a skip level review or something to see is salespeople want to know that their boss can also do their job, that they're credible, and that they'll roll up their sleeves and get their arms dirty. Or when a salesperson brings an issue, that their direct leader is going to go to battle for them and really have their back.
Mhm.
And you look, salespeople are inherently pretty good, all things considering, at kind of reading the room, at least, right? That's part of being in sales, is reading the room and body language and those. And if they lose confidence that their direct leaders can understand their true barriers to their success, and they're not just looking at some goofy dashboard that says all these metrics, which is a whole nother topic around, kind of effective modern leadership, is the metric topic, which, we can certainly touch on. But yeah, the authenticity thing, and can you do what your people do? Do you truly understand that? If I want to dig into a failing sales organization, I would first go, dig in, what's the field crew really struggling with? And does their direct leader understand the dynamics and the difficulty? And are they
Mhm.
blocking and tackling and helping pull revenue forward, not just saying, oh man, let's work on some more activity and, call it a win, try to,
You bring up an amazing point, and here's where there's two things that I want to. So one, the quickest way to kill a salesperson, a high performing salesperson, is make them a manager. However, that being said, I don't want to work for a manager who hasn't walked in my shoes, who's never been a salesperson. Because if they've never experienced what it's like to be out there and do the grind, make the calls, put the work in, they don't understand what it's like to go through the pains of being a salesperson. However, that being said, I go back to what I just said. The quickest way to kill a top producing salesperson is to say, hey, you should be a manager.
amen.
And,
Couldn't
and
agree more. Yeah.
right. So there's that, the chicken and the egg kind of situation of, well, oh crap. An organization has to be wildly selective and careful, and understand that not every top producing salesperson, just because they're an amazing salesperson, is meant to be a leader. And they may not even know that they're not meant to be a leader. And so many times I hear of, like, oh, I was promoted to a manager and it just didn't work out. And instead of that organization saying to that person, like, do you think that maybe it would be better for you to just kind of shift back into producing? Do you want to do that? And have that person be given the option of, you know what? Yeah, I was better at that than I am as a leader. They'll just fire them and be like, yeah, this isn't working out. Sorry, you're not meeting. And then they get fired. And it's like, well, and sometimes that person got pushed into managing. In my career, I turned down multiple management roles. I was a top producer and they kept coming, we want you to be a manager. We want you to mentor everybody else. And I was like, no, I'm a producer and I'm me alone. And then they were like, okay, just mentor, just help the other team understand what your process is. I'm like, I just want to produce. But they see that other person is like really doing a great job. And they're like, how can we get this person to teach the other people what you're doing? And it's like, just, you want to keep that really high producing person, like still producing at a high level, leave them alone.
I don't think you could have phrased that better. It is an absolute predicament. And that's why I think really, really highly effective sales leaders, they're very difficult to find, because it's a breed between being a high impact people leader
Mm-hmm.
and also being capable to understand the kind of ins and outs of being an effective salesperson and how to speak that language. high performing salespeople, they want the tools and they want a leader who will just get out of their way. And that when they come to the problem, they'll fight fiercely for them.
Right.
And too often, yeah, the wrong people get promoted because they think that's the path. And so how do you avoid that? Like somebody like, well, geez, if they can do good in sales, like why can't they just help everyone do that well? It's like, well, if you use some of the tools that help assess people's personality styles and their dynamics, there's a couple of tools out there. A lot of people do DISC or predictive index and other things like that kind of tell you if you're one of those high performing salespeople, but probably won't be great as a people leader. That's a good direct mechanism to try to figure that out. We use predictive index at my current company and my last one too. And there's some really great things that come from that. I'm getting kind of the right people on the right seat in the bus.
Right.
So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And yeah, that's certainly why I think there are some sales organizations that they feel the momentum because the high performing sales guy was driving revenue at a good place. And then what happens? We shifted him into a leadership role, and then there's some stagnation or even decline. It's like, well, the math is actually pretty easy.
Right.
So, you mentioned one other thing too around what happens to a person that's wrongly promoted. And it's actually, you said, well, like, let's talk to them and say, look, you should maybe shift back into an individual contributor role. That conversation to me is also where a lot of leadership fails. They can't exercise kind of radical candor. And there's a very fine line with being able to be very direct and candid with teams and knowing that, look, we're going to have a hard conversation and it comes from a good place, but there's a delivery mechanism there. And so, effective communication and being a good leader, it comes from radical candor, being able to, I can forecast what my team needs. I'm out ahead of them and I can anticipate that. I can support them on the sales side. I can navigate the leadership conversations. And it's a very tricky role to do it well because there's a lot of different skill sets needed. And when one of those portions fail, it just throws a wrench in your whole sales engine. You either not getting what they need, or you lose people, and then it starts the process over. And depending upon your sales cycle, I mean, you lose a good person in a book of business, goes stale. Geez, I mean, it could be quarters worth of revenue that it takes to recover from that.
Right. It's difficult when people avoid hard conversations. But here's the thing: if you're planning on being a leader, you're planning on running a business, you're planning on managing people. It's part of the job.
Big time. Yeah.
You have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's part of the job. There are going to be days that you have really hard, bad, shitty conversations, and people are going to walk away all feeling bad about it. And here's something that's really important. If you are a leader and you enjoy those conversations, there's a problem. If you are a leader and you enjoy firing people, that's a problem. It shouldn't be something that you enjoy doing. It's a necessary evil, but if you start to enjoy it, that's a problem. And I say that because people, yes, sometimes deserve to be fired, but you are causing trauma to a human being. And if you start to enjoy that, then yeah, there's an issue with that. But sometimes it needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, for those who maybe aren't, you say, geez, am I good at, being, candid with people? You need to go seek feedback. And that's where, kind of the lifelong learning, feedback is a gift. Something else I like around feedback is actually, salespeople don't like to look back a long ways and get a bunch of kind of feedback about kind of 6 months ago in the sales world feels like an absolute eternity. So if you have biannual reviews, or you've got a, individual, improvement plan or performance plan, or, some type of touch point to improve your circumstances, a leader's got to look at, the lens of, all right, if I'm a top performing salespeople, or I'm going to treat them like the capabilities they have, you can't go back in these ancient conversations. You need to be looking forward around, I'm going to give some evidence around what I observed. Let's have some two-way feedback and be able to apply that to how do you navigate the next steps here. And I always tell people, to me, the best leaders, what they do is they take complex problems and break them down into bite-sized, simple actions.
Yes.
And some people just don't have the brain or the natural thought process on like, how do I take all this messy stuff, what feels like a insurmountable amount of work or difficulty or, a tough sales cycle or these big personalities to deal with, and like, how do you break that down and navigate that? And those are the things that actually move deals forward. Those are the
Hmm.
things that keep people in your organization. And if they lose confidence that you can't help them with that in times they need it, then they're going to look around for, people take the path of least resistance.
Right.
So yeah, I made some excellent, considerations there on, what people need.
So as we wrap up our conversation, what is the greatest advice that you would give to, a new leader coming up, or somebody who's looking to become a leader in sales? What advice would you give to them?
Man, I think a lot of things I'd like to share because it is a tough role. But, one of the things that I always would tell as I was coaching new leaders in the organizations I worked at, or someone who said, I want to move into leadership, or I want to get better at this, is, you've got to be able to sit down and look things very empirically. There's emotion tied to things. You deal with a lot. Leading people is inherently hard. It's, some people do it more naturally, right? Because they're just kind of bred for that, or they're just committed to it. But, one of the things I would say is, the best thing you can do is instill two-way accountability. And this is that, I'm going to go back to that boss leader thing.
Mhm.
Bosses, it's very one-way accountability. I'm going to look at results and address accordingly. It's not a reflection of, did I give you the tools? Am I the one creating a bottleneck in my team's success? And so being empirical about like what you bring to the table, where you add value, and the only way to do that is to go solicit candid feedback and two-way accountability, and it should be extremely comfortable. When I meet a new, like, I've taken over a lot of sales teams, and one of the first things I tell people is, look, one of the things I need from you is to know anything I communicate to you comes from a good place. I'm invested in your success. But if there's ever a point where you feel I'm not bringing to you the value you need, I need you to walk in my office, and I don't care what language you use. I don't care how you say it, but just walk in my office and tell me specifically where I dropped the ball. I won't be upset. I won't be, emotional about it. Just bring the evidence, so we can speak in facts. And there's some opinion there, but it eases the tension, and the relationship tends to get off on a really good start when people know that there's two-way accountability, and that there's a manager or leader in the organization that says, I'm humble enough, I can swallow my pride and ego. My title is not what's important. It's about the greater success. You got to embrace that general mentality. And if not, you're going to fail. People are going to leave. They're not going to work for crappy people anymore. This is not happening. Too many options. I can work remote. I can go somewhere else. Job hopping's a thing. I can go negotiate for more money. Like all these reasons people have to leave. And you need to be the reason that they want to stay. So like, if you're not looking inward, you're going to have
Right.
real problems looking outward,
The greatest leader leads as a servant's heart, and
Yeah.
and they are looking at lifting their people up, not being the overlord of numbers and matrix. And they are literally there to serve their team as a conduit to get them everything they need to be successful. And if they're dropping the ball in any way, they need to be able to look at themselves and say, okay, maybe I'm not doing the best that I can do today, and be willing to self-improve. I grew up with a dad who was, a sales leader of sometimes a team of up to 65 people at any given time. That is a lot of salespeople, a lot of different personalities. And he was on the phone he led a real estate team. So they were working all the time, right? Real estate, any given time. Most of the calls that I would hear when I was a kid, he wasn't talking about, it was usually more personal, like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that that's going on. How can I help you? And it's like, he literally was there kind of like a dad. to all of his team, just to help get that person through whatever they needed when they needed it, to help them. And it's funny, when he retired, it was during during COVID, he said, let's not do a party. That would be too much of a mess to try to organize and blah. He asked for everybody to send him a card. And I read some of these, and it was insane how most of the people he led thought of him as a friend, as almost a father figure, of most of them saying, thank you for helping me create a career. And that is where I learned most of understanding of what a leader was supposed to be. They're not supposed to be somebody who is stopping you or making it more difficult for you to do your job, or somebody who sits down with you once a quarter and says, now I've reviewed your matrix. You are 100 calls short of where you're supposed to be on your cold calls. Like that. Like, oh my gosh, if that's how you're managing your team, you're not going to have one. And I remember interviewing for a job, and they're like, we just want to set the expectations. We require 500 cold calls a week. We require X amount of appointments a week. And I went, yeah, I'm not interested. Like, if this is a matrix driven job, I'm not interested. I am way beyond that as a salesperson. My relationships that I have and that I can bring to the table are worth way more than you telling me that I need to make 500 cold calls a week.
Yeah.
Who?
I'm chuckling because it's literally like there's a great guy that I follow. His name's Brian Burns. He talks about the brutal truth around sales and leadership. He's got he makes fun of this exact topic, just the number of people in these leadership roles that they manage to dashboards and activity,
Yep.
rather than capability and who's actually producing, and the amount of unnecessary work poor leaders make good salespeople do administratively, or just to kind of CYA, so that when they go to present to their their leadership, here's the shiny presentation, and
Right.
let me show you everything we're doing, rather than working on things that actually produce revenue and giving people autonomy to leverage their organic and excellent skill sets and personalities and networks. Yeah, I just, the spiral effect of managing to activity, it just, top salespeople will not put up with it.
No.
I mean, it's pretty wild how many companies still think that they can manage that way. It's insane.
No, I wouldn't
Yeah.
even, I mean, even back, this was years ago, even back then I was like, that's not how I sell. Like, yes, I will do the activity, but I'm not going to sell that way. Like, that's not how if you're going to manage me that way, like, no, thanks. But anyways, we are coming to time. And right now, this is, Dustin, the opportunity for you to give your 30-second shameless pitch. Go at it. Anything. I mean, you can, anything you want. 30-second shameless pitch.
Yeah, I'll take a plug. Yeah, so look, I'm a big relationship guy, and so if you're in the greater Milwaukee market, our company, Office H2O, we're the quintessential kind of two guys in a garage story, and now the largest privately held company. We do purified drinking water and ice systems for businesses, and look, if you're open to connecting, I'm a big fan of kind of learning how the world goes around, and my favorite part is learning about other companies and the people, and so I'd love to connect. You certainly find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me on officeh2o.com, and tell you more about how we call it the low-hanging fruit to health, wellness, and sustainability in your organization. So come find me.
Awesome. Yeah. And Dustin's LinkedIn and where you can connect with him will be in the show notes. So yeah, reach out to him. But again, Dustin, this has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you joining me today.
No, thank you for hosting such a great podcast.
This podcast is sponsored by Sales Rescue. Ready to revolutionize your sales strategy? Sales Rescue is here to transform your business's approach with proven success. At rescuemysales.com, we turn the frustration of missed targets into the thrill of exceeding goals, empowering you to meet and surpass your sales ambitions, leading to growth and profitability. Exclusively for Love Your Sales listeners, claim your free sales consultation today and receive our Sales Rescue AI playbook. Start your journey with sales excellence now. But hurry, this free offer is only available for a limited time. Visit rescuemysales.com now. That's rescuemysales.com. Don't miss this free opportunity at Sales Rescue, where we rescue your sales so you love your profits.
Thanks for joining us for Love Your Sales. For more, connect with Leighann on LinkedIn and be sure to subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and review. We'd love to hear what you think. Looking for a way to take your sales process to the next level? Visit us at loveyoursales.com to find out more about how Leighann can take your organization to new revenue heights. And be sure to join us next time for more great ways to love your customers so they love your sales.